Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. We're going to have, just to sort of set the stage, some of the world's biggest advances in science have depended on collaborations across borders. And so in the context of geopolitical tensions and the rise of nationalism, the question is, how can collaboration continue to thrive? And that's what we're going to look at today. And to do that, we have this really wonderful panel. I'm going to introduce everyone. Next to me is Yi Rao. He's the president of the Capital Medical University in Beijing. Thank you for being here. And next to him is Mauro Ferrari. He is the new president of the European Research Council. Next to Magdalena Skipper, who is the editor-in-chief of Nature. And on the end is Stefan Oschmann, and he is the chairman of the executive board and chief executive officer of Merck. So thank you all again for being here. We're going to talk for about 30 minutes, and then I will turn over to some audience questions. There'll be someone coming around with a mic. When you ask a question, please stand up, introduce yourself, and keep your question concise. And if you're following along online, please use the hashtag WEF20, WEF20. And I would like to get us started. And I think just to, again, set the scene, I think it would be great to hear from each of you about this sort of historical precedent here in terms of scientific collaboration and how they've collided with geopolitical tensions in the past, if anybody would like to jump in.
Well, I first need to correct. At the global level in science, there is no nationalism. There's only Trumpism in the US, which is damaging some of the international collaborations. So that fact has to be set in the very beginning. And for example, we have no problem communicating, collaborating with European universities or countries. And I do get turned down by the US government for visas to attend academic meetings. But I get invited to go to Canada to review the Geithner Award. I get invited to go to visit Britain or Italy or Germany for academic exchanges. So there is no general nationalism. And if you look at the history that you mentioned, and the panel is a very good representation. If I look at my science, and there's my family's scholarly background. In my family, there's continuous college education for 5 generations. But on the other hand, my science all came from British, German, and French academic pedigrees. One of my master degree advisor, her father went to Britain, was at UCL, and from that lineage, I can go to Henry Dale, who has contributed to science and industry. And then from my graduate advisors, I can go to Thomas Morgan in the US, and further go to Thomas Huxley in Britain. So those all are international legacies that passed on to scientists of different countries. And so we benefit a great deal from international academic exchanges, and for which we are very grateful. And it's, by now, with economic development in China that's going on well, we feel finally we should do more in basic science and contributing to human civilization. And it's at this stage there came a very unique and strangely liar called Trump that's disrupting some of the exchanges that we intend to benefit humankind.
So, shall I? I'm going to pick up this theme of positive examples and perhaps even weave in support from political leaders, and so which is encouraging to consider. So the example which I always like to bring when international collaboration is discussed is that of the Human Genome Project. Before I became an editor, I was a geneticist. And in fact, before becoming editor-in-chief of Nature, for many years, I was Nature's genetics and genomics editor. So this is something that's very close to my heart and a community that I'm very familiar with. But of course, the Human Genome Project, which is almost 20 years old, 19 years since the publication of the draft sequence, there were 2 efforts happening in parallel. So there was tension there. The tension was between the public effort and the private effort. But if we just focus on the public effort, it was absolutely an amazing effort which brought together researchers from so many different parts of the world, researchers who had not collaborated previously. And it's a beautiful example. So, for example, Japan and China was collaborating with many nations in Europe and, of course, the US and beyond. And it's a wonderful example because, of course, those groups were working on the Human Genome Project, which was the common sort of good, if you like, just as all science is. And in the end, the genome is something that unites us, that has taught us about how much we have in common, much more than actually divides us. And the link to the political leaders is, of course, at that time, the leaders of the US and the UK were very much behind that public effort and that public good. And without that effort today, we would not be talking about precision medicine, for example, and so many other things. So to me, that's a beautiful example to uphold, an example that we have to remember, both when it comes to building international collaborations and sharing expertise, data, and so on, and indeed, when we talk about open science without boundaries.
Now, if you ask people what has the European Union contributed, what are the reasons why it should have come into existence, what are the great things that it has brought to Europe and through Europe to the world, most surveys will tell you that the vast majority of respondents will tell you peace and collaborations in science. And the fact that peace and collaborations in science go hand in hand, I think is very natural. One reason why it is very natural is the fact that scientists have a collaborative phenotype. As a scientist, you always try to look for the scientists that can, of course, collaborate with you, complement your expertise, help you solve the problems that you need to solve, especially in this day and age, where, of course, science is becoming so superdisciplinary. We used to use the word multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary. These becoming last Thursday's type of words, right? Things are become so complex, and of course the growth in the knowledge curve has been so extraordinary that these boundaries dissolve between the different disciplines. And all of a sudden you need to go find people that know certain things here and there, wherever they may be. And the cultural environment that you find as you walk into a lab in any part of the world is very similar. Similar psychology, similar interactions. The similarity in spirit is what brings people together. So I think it is not surprising that scientific collaborations and peace, looking at the European Union as a prime example, have gone hand in hand. One example that I find very spectacular is that of space research. International Space Station, where I'm fortunate to have had some of my experiments as well, are flown. Of course, the International Space Station is called international for a reason, and you find, of course, parts of the world that used to be at odds geopolitically in a very dramatic fashion, now collaborating on every aspect of research so that they can contribute, as Rao was saying, to the betterment of humankind. I think that's a very, very powerful example that flies physically and metaphorically over everybody's head every day.
Do you, I guess, bringing us to the present, what current sort of multilateral scientific efforts are at risk of being, or at risk as a result of weakening diplomatic ties? And I guess, are there, the fact that the move toward bilateral agreements, is that having an effect on scientific efforts?
I don't think there's any problem with that part. It's mainly Trump and his people, including Francis Collins of the NIH, who was here earlier today. They institute policies specifically targeting scientists of Chinese origin in the biomedical science, where we have no secrets. We all want Magdalena to take our paper to Nature to publish. There's no secrets to steal. There's no military meanings. So it's called insaneness on part of Trumpism. And that's affecting the communication. And what they've done to American scientists of Chinese origin has been persecuting them for no good reason and trying to dig up dirt where they find none. And they went on to the Science and other publications to claim the 1,000 Talent Program is a program by the Chinese government to steal intellectual property from the US, which is complete BS. I was one of the 4 people, 4 scientists, who suggested to the Chinese government that we should set up a recruit program for basic scientists. And some scientists got recruited quickly, some wants to take a transition for a longer period. That China is basically suffering of paying those scientists for double salary or double funding. US is benefiting from it. And so for the NIH to take the 1,000 Talent Program as an issue, it's complete BS. That only insane people would have done that.
There are 2 people who would like to weigh in.
Just a specific comment to this. I think it's fair to add to this that there was a very interesting and, in my opinion, positive response from a number of universities in the US, including from administrative heads of universities. Would you agree to that? I'm sorry, I know I'm not here to ask questions,
you can ask.
but I just wonder what it looks like from your perspective.
Most of them have been ambiguous. They all understand this is wrong, but they're under the pressure of NIH say, if you don't obey me, if you don't kowtow to the party line of Trump, then you risk the entire institution to lose funding from the NIH. So it's intimidation, political intimidation that's affecting this. And there's one issue that most people don't understand, that I have friends who are American citizens. When they were at major airports in the US, armed personnel came to them, confiscated the computer and cell phones, and they would say, wait, I'm a US citizen, I need a lawyer. And the answer is, this is international waiting area, no law applies. And they're making major airports in the US, Guantanamo Bay. And this is not what one person say. You should all ask the Homeland Security of the US government and say, do they define international terminals in US major cities as Guantanamo Bay or not?
Well, I'd like to speak on the positive about the great relationships that I've enjoyed over the years with Chinese scientists. Being operating from the United States, I was in the United States for 40 years. I just came back to Europe very recently. And the nature of those collaborations were, of course, the sharing of the science, the collaborating on the science, but also another aspect which had not been practiced very much before and maybe right now. You know, I'm of the generation where everybody was going to the United States, and most people, or many people, were remaining in the United States. We had such great collaborations with China. For years, I was a foreign member of Chinese Academy of Sciences, that we decided to actually do a reverse of the very same, a reciprocal, if you will, of the very same arrangements, and we started sending students to get their PhDs in China. And there were students that would come from Europe or from the United States, have great experiences. In my case, it was in Beijing as well. We would co-mentor the students. They would have typically great results, multiple successes, wonderful publications, and then sometimes stay in one country, sometimes stay in the other. Most of the time, end up collaborating for a lifetime. So this notion of reversing the flow and making sure that everything will be reciprocal and equal, I think that's a fundamental. I think that's something we need to develop further among all countries.
I completely agree. Not only that, I think Chinese scientists of my generation are actually very grateful to all the education and opportunity we have in the US and in European countries. And we feel it's time that we contribute more. And part of that would be through more collaborations rather than being cut off from collaboration.
Plus, every time I go to China, I get to learn 10 words in Chinese. Unfortunately, it's always the same 10 words. So I haven't made too much progress. But
I want to shift to what sort of the global, what global collaborations are needed most right now. And maybe, Stefan, maybe this is a place for you to weigh in.
Yeah, so I guess my role is to represent the private sector here, and I can't claim to be a scientist anymore. I used to be a scientist. I'm a business executive these days. I represent a company that is 352 years old. We were founded in 1668. Out of our roughly 60,000 employees, we have 8,000 scientists, people who actively work in research. And we used to be a pharmaceutical company. We're still very much into biopharma, but we're also into anything scientists need in the labs. And people say that we're the Amazon of science, and we're very deep into material science, electronic materials, just that you understand who I am. If I look at collaborations, I would say that in the private sector, on the one hand, there is a continued trend for much more open collaboration. We used to have in the industries in which we work, we used to have an approach that data are our data, sort of it's our proprietary, these are our proprietary items. That has changed. Not some of this was voluntary on our side. Some of this was based on the pressure of researchers and activists and so on. And if you go into companies like ours, you would find these sort of open innovation centers where we work with academia, with industrial partners, with startups. If you look into our labs, whether you're in Boston or in Shanghai or in Darmstadt in Germany, and you look at the faces, you see many Chinese faces, many Indian faces. They work together flawlessly because science is a universal language. We have labs where we have Israelis and Iranians working together very well. All of that is nice. But I would say there are certain trends that are concerning. I've been around for quite some while, and I think this is my 20th Davos. And in the old ages, at some point in time, I was with a different company, and I was asked to give a talk about techno-nationalism. And I was more junior at that time, so that was probably somebody else had opted out, and they asked me to give that talk, and I had basically zero preparation. And if you work for a large company, you have handlers. They usually come from corporate affairs or communications. And I said to my handler, what the hell is techno-nationalism? Because I was supposed to give a speech about this. And he said, well, nationalism and technology. And I said, okay. So I was trying to organize my mind, and I then organized this talk more as a sort of a debate. And there were some, and I don't claim to be a genius or even a stable genius or so, but there was a pretty good debate some 15 years ago where people predicted that with the rise of China, with the rise of India, that technological superiority or airspace supremacy would become a geostrategic factor. We don't necessarily see this in biomedical research, but we see it in semiconductor research, where we see all sorts of governments having very different approaches. I agree with you in your assessment of the US situation, but we also see such trends in other big countries, very big countries. This is not a simple thing. If you look at the two areas which I understand most, biotech and electronics, and you look at the U.S. situation anyway, but you look at Made in China 2025 or so, there are certain trends that where people say, where governments say, it's of geostrategic importance to be in a leading position in science. In this area. If you look at chip making, for instance, everybody thinks that artificial intelligence is mostly about software. That's wrong. We had the mathematical concepts for machine learning existed in the 1960s, basically, but we didn't have the hardware. We didn't have the computing power. We didn't have the memory. So being a leader in AI requires that you have a strong base in AI research and in chip making, and there are several forces in the world who are enforcing this very much. So I don't necessarily have an answer, but I do think we have a problem that goes beyond Trump. That would be my hypothesis.
Incidentally, we are all in the biomedical field, of all of us, and so it's very natural to argue that in the biomedical world, the international collaboration is very important. AIDS was first diagnosed in San Francisco, but it did not stop there. And in the 80s, in China, many people called that a Western decadent disease. No, it's also in China now. And China now has a coronavirus infection. It's not going to stop in China. It's also going to go to other countries. So we have to collaborate in every way to try to prevent and cure diseases. And so there's no reason at all to have any nationalism about diseases. The diseases don't stop at any borders. So our collaboration should not stop at national borders, which is arbitrary.
If you look at the translation of this, let's say, if you look at current trends, for instance, in CAR-T, you look at the number of clinical trials. There are 115 CAR-T clinical trials in China. There are 85 in the US. There are 15 in Europe. Mm-hmm. So my concern is really the competitiveness of Europe in these hot fields. And if you talk to senior level people in all countries, they perceive that being successful, having a prominent position in these areas is a question of national competitiveness. So I agree with you at the basic science level when it comes to applying these technologies to closer to market type of things change.
But I want to fly a flag of an idealist here.
Yes.
So, yes? Oh, we're going to fly a flag together. Excellent.
Let's fly it.
And so, yes, of course, we are talking about this when it comes to applying the fruits of basic research. And of course, it doesn't just end with biomedical research. So many of the sessions at this meeting are devoted to discussing sustainability-related issues, right? At the basis of providing solutions to these questions lies research and science in so many different disciplines. These questions, if we are going to, let's take your example of CAR-T-based therapy. Yes, you can think of strategic dominance of a certain country or another, depending on how many trials there are. And of course, probably the more trials there are, the greater the chance that at least one will be successful. But in the end, we can look at this at a global scale. We can look at the population at a global scale. Do we want to have a healthier population globally? Healthier because they're treated, cured of a disease that they suffer from. Healthier because they live in a healthier environment. In that situation, we all win. So can we think about amplifying the language of science, which, as you said and has been mentioned in other contexts, is a common language that crosses the political and geographic barriers. Can we amplify that language over and above the language of politicians and the language of maybe business?
Yes.
Let's do it.
And let's look at the last 150 years. There are many wars between Europeans or between Europeans and others. And throughout that period, scientists have kept their dialogue. They have the common truth that they all share, even in the harshest of national killings of each other. So we should be the unifying force, and biomedical science especially.
Can I tell two stories?
Please.
One is quick. The other ones will be longer. European Research Council, we are open to the world for science to foster collaborations. In particular, our synergy grants, multiple investigator grants, people can apply from all over the world and the money can be spent anywhere in the world. So exactly because of this notion that science to be expressed at these greatest possible levels where it can do the greatest benefits to humankind requires people of goodwill and of talent no matter where they reside. So we're big believers in that. Second story. Sometimes I think science can help in things that are not necessarily associated with science per se. The whole world has the problem the little towns are dying. And with that, cultures are dying and disappearing, and traditions and things of great value are dying. So my wife, who is the smart one in the family, and she's right here, came up with this idea about 15 years ago that in a very small town in the south of Italy, financially very, very depressed, one of the poorest parts of Europe, she would start an invitational meeting in the field of nanomedicine. And people came in, a few by invitations, and it was a stark contrast to have these superstar scientists coming from all over the world at their own expense, meeting these people, most of whom had a very limited education. All of these kids, they had no prospect in a town of about 400 people. And over time, the bond between the community and the scientists, the new scientists that were added, became stronger and stronger, and the scientists go live in the homes of the local people, and we put together a program for the children, then the so-called the Nano Academy, and now the kids of that particular small town, they probably know more about nanomedicine than any other concentration of kids in the world, and from no hope, all of a sudden, all the kids wanted to be scientists and surgeons and whatever else, and they had developed different role models. One genius idea that she had was the notion of making these cards, like, you know, the soccer player cards or football player cards. We had scientist cards. And so kids would go and get the signatures and get the T-shirt signed. I've seen Nobel laureates in tears because the kids come up and ask them for autographs. That doesn't happen to scientists very much. It created a big bond. People are coming from all over the world. And now, all of a sudden, that notion of using science as an inspiration to change a dying small community into the thriving community that it is right now, that has found a vocation and identity, now it's time to multiplex it and bring it out. And now we are having a replication of that for refugee children in Amman, Jordan. We have them in other parts of the world. We develop programs with African countries. We develop programs. This is the lady. All sorts of other things. So if you think creatively, again, the scientific phenotype is a collaborative mental phenotype, is a problem solver, is a peace associated, is a solution for humankind type of mental phenotype. And the more we can bring people together, separating that from the geopolitical tensions that happen all sorts of other levels, the more we can be a unifying force. And that's our mandate and our mission. Thank you.
I'm going to come to the audience in a second, but I have a question for Stefan, just picking up on that. How can the private sector be intermediaries in all of this and sort of facilitating international collaboration? How's it been done? What's worked? And I think, I'm sorry, there's like 4 questions. And what are you most hopeful about there?
Yeah, so I totally agree with what my fellow panelists said about that the fact that science is a force for good. There's no doubt about that. If you combine science with responsibility, almost all of what we've seen in terms of human progress is based on that. And science is not only a force for good. Science is something that unites people. Zero doubt about that. What I wanted to say with my earlier comments was that at the same time, we can't be naive of these trends that are external from science, that impact science, and we need to be prepared, and we need to strengthen our efforts. In the private sector, if I speak of my company, we often we have a very active recruitment process. We usually recruit postdocs, and we often recruit agnostic to location. So people can choose whether they want to work in Boston, whether they want to work in Shanghai, in Tokyo, in Darmstadt, or whatever. And collaboration within the science space has changed radically. If you just look at the architecture of laboratories these days, you go back only 20 years, you had your individual scientists or small groups work in sort of solitary confinement. If you look at the architecture of research centers nowadays, it's all about communication and collaboration. So science is actually a wonderful vehicle.
Look at the papers they publish as well, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
So no doubt about that. The other aspect is that in these innovation ecosystems, even large companies like mine are not capable anymore of carrying out projects on our own. You need to have so there's the financing side, venture capital and others is very important. You need to have a very, very open approach towards startups. And for instance, I mean, the two universities we work a lot with, or 2 research institutions, the Weizmann Institute in Israel, it's like family. The other one is Hebrew University. It's interesting to see that these universities have a very different philosophy. Weizmann says, we want our scientists to do nothing but research. And then we have a technology transfer office that connects you with private sector and others. Hebrew University says we want our professors to create startups. So you even have art historians creating startups. So if you're a professor at Hebrew University, you go through a boot camp on how to create new businesses. So what I mean is the collaboration between academia, government, private sector being both corporates and startups, has changed drastically, and it's by definition global. You know, it cannot work without the free movement of thought.
Can I be allowed to give a story to back up what Stefan just said? That from basic research to applied or commercial success is a very long road in the biomedical sciences. So for example, in the Vietnam War, there's more casualty on both sides due to malaria than actually gunfight. So both the US and China were trying to make anti-malaria drug to help the military on both sides. And in that story, a Chinese female scientist, Yu Tu, her teacher was trained in Britain and taught her in the 1950s how to discover drugs. From the late 60s to early 70s, she was put on the task of trying to get a new anti-malaria drug to lower Vietnamese and Chinese casualty against the US Army. And that was the purpose. But by the time she discovered the drug, the war was over. It did not help either side on the war efforts. And her intellectual tradition came from a British scientist, British trained Chinese scientist. Then once the drug was made, invented, she has made not a single penny. A Northern European company patent some of the processes and make a small profit. And the major benefits are not to US or China, it's to Africans and Southeast Asians. And so biomedical research primarily is to help people improve health. Secondarily, there could be some commercial part to it, and it's not the reverse side. And by making the competition about money as the primary goal, that's exactly the opposite of what biomedical research is about. And once we set the goals clear, I mean, collaboration, international net, or otherwise, should always be embraced by all of us. And I hope the face of Trumpism will someday pass in the US, will be back to normal.
I want to open it up for questions because we have a few minutes left. If you have a question, please raise your hand and someone will come give you a mic. There's one in the front here. If you could stand and just say your name as well.
Thank you very much. My name is Hayat Sindi. I'm a senior advisor to the Islamic Development Bank for Science, Technology, and Innovation for the President of Islamic Development Bank. I'm also Goodwill Ambassador for STEM for Girls at UNESCO. I would like to pick some of the points I heard here, which is very much resonate about our new business model at the bank. We are not a conventional bank, we're a multilateral bank. We serve 1.7 billion people around the world in 4 continents, and all our member countries are developing countries, and 21 of them is least developed. And you can see that for us, innovation and science and technology is the key driver for economic stability. So we adopt the vision of, as a core, our strategy, how we can integrate science within our projects, how we can help our member countries to adopt the innovation strategy, and also how we can give seed money to the entrepreneurs. And we set up a fund for $500 million 2 years ago. And we want to, as a universal call, so no gender issue, no nationality, no age limits. And you can be a professor, you can be a VC, you can be an individual to apply to the fund to address challenges like food security, water, health, infrastructure, and energy. And a lot of people said you're a dreamer because our member country facing so many challenges. So when we started this fund 2 years ago, we had about 4,300 interests from 100 countries. And last year, we had more than 5,000 from 173 countries. And I love the idea of academy. So we get all the winners regarding their nationality. So we sponsor any nationality to get together to be able to understand the journey of a startup, because we invest in every single part of the level of innovation from an idea point of view to commercialization. And that's very important, because to invest in risk innovation for us is going to shape our economy, and it's the best way to do it within the youth, within the own community. And the other thing I wanted to mention, which is very important, about how we're going to encourage girls, and especially women, to be in STEM and to be an AI expert, because AI talent and demand is going to rise and is already doubled for the past 3 years. And so now so much demand for data scientist, software engineer, machine learning engineer. So we need also to how to tell the story. It's not going to be a stigma how you look like to be a scientist. I mean, because we have that. So we need to reach out to the school, to the girls, to say that scientist doesn't have to be a man or middle-aged man, blue eyes, because that's the way when you go and ask the little boys and girls, draw a picture of a scientist.
Is there a question that comes from your work that you would want to pose to one of these? No, it's important work, but is there something you would like?
Well, it is a speech and a comment, because that's I wanted to say what we can contribute to the world of innovation, to the world of collaboration. And I wanted to say how you are going to be, because I could ask how we can encourage women to be in STEM and AI field.
Thank you.
Can I comment on the comment? I think you brought out something really important. So perhaps inevitably, a lot of our conversation focused on the political sort of intersection of politics and a little bit of business, but then science. But of course, collaboration in science and diversity in that collaboration has many other dimensions. And so one of them, in fact, you mentioned two. One, of course, is gender dimension, but you can extend it to other underrepresented groups in science. So be it representing different parts of the world or different ethnicities engaging in science and collaboration. And why is that important? I mean, it's important because, of course, everyone should engage, if they so desire, engage in scientific discourse and contribute to the scientific discovery. But it's important because coming from these different perspectives, you approach problems through a different prism. You approach the problem differently, and you provide the solutions in a different way. So in turn, this enriches the process and actually leads us to a greater diversity and much richer set of answers to the questions. So that's another dimension for the reason for which collaboration is so important. So thank you for that.
Another question? Down in front here.
So given the context we're presented with today, my question is, what is the role of scientists, and basic scientists in particular, in the formation of public opinion? So multiple surveys would say that scientists are some of the most trusted people in the world. Is that because they're not advocates? And when you see science that's important to the future of the world, how does real science interact with some of that misinformation such that they preserve their own credibility?
Anyone like to take that?
Magdalena's probably the best.
I can try it, although, there are scientists on the panel. So, I mean, the simple answer to your question, which was, do scientists play a role? I think they play an absolutely key role. And they should absolutely embrace and cherish that privileged position of being trusted and being credible. There are so many examples, historic examples, where I think scientists could have done more to take that position and advocate in favor, explain the science that they were engaging with. Instead, the communication was left to journalists who, incidentally, on the same surveys tend to come at the bottom. So I absolutely think that they should be part of that communication. They are, after all, the best equipped with the facts. Sometimes researchers can do with some help in how to convey the facts to the general public. in a suitable, nuanced way, but they should absolutely engage. And again, I'm going to say that that diversity of players in the research ecosystem is going to make the communication more effective. Because of course, in terms of those who are being communicated to, different things resonate with different people. So the more diversity there is amongst communicators, the more effective that communication is going to be.
I actually have a very different view. I think is Western, especially American scientists, do not understand history. Right? American scientists in the 1960s, 70s used to stand up for Soviet scientists when they were under political pressure. Now the political pressure are on American scientists. They have no idea how to deal with it. No American scientist, great or common, has stood up for the climate scientist colleagues at all when they are under pressure from the Trump administration. So I'm actually very afraid if Trump gets back to his ideas about vaccination, then his biomedical science, especially immunology in the US, would that be crushed as well to the extent of climate science has been crushed in the US? I mean, I don't think American scientists have undergone historic experiences to know experience in Germany, in Russia, and other countries, that we are more aware that when pressure comes, how do we live and stand the test of time? And it's time actually American scientists are mainly so far failing the test of being able to resist political pressure.
We have just a few minutes left. I want to ask, unless there's another question, I have one question a parting question for all of you. Maybe we'll start nearest to me and you can have the final word. And that is sort of, given the audience here, and you're thinking about the scientific outlook and collaborations, what can the people in this room do? You're first.
This room on that side or on this side?
The greater room, the greater
I think they should do a lot of things. We are all in the
Exactly.
same room.
We should not take sides.
That's the answer. We are all in the same room. No, please, sorry.
We're going this way?
He's going to get the final, we'll go this way. We'll get
I
Stefan the
believe
final word.
every scientist should hold up our principles. We seek truth in nature, in science. We should stand our grounds of our principles that's true to science and nature, including against any kind of political pressure.
Mara?
Great. This really connects to your earlier question about the way scientists are seen, which is actually an interesting dichotomy, because on one side, it is true, there is a lot of trust in science. And Greta says, listen to the scientists. And everybody's, look, why? Because it's fact-driven, data-driven. And the notion that, data can actually drive policy is something that kind of everybody hopes that it will inform political decisions for the betterment of all systems, so everybody around the world. But on the other hand, you look at the movies, how are scientists portrayed most of the times? I think it's a crazy scientist that wants to destroy the world, or somewhat unstable person. There is all sorts of different interesting depictions. So I think the greatest thing that we can do as scientists right now is to help resolve that paradox by showing the scientists it's kind of like everybody else, right? So I like to do shows where I go sing songs and I play music that tell science stories, or anything else that we can do as a community of scientists to make sure that we really communicate effectively with the world around us. I think would be very effective in developing new partnerships, if you will.
So your question was, what can people in this room do? Mm-hmm. And we're discussing collaboration. So I'm going to be slightly flippant, and I'm going to suggest that we should all collaborate. So there are people in this room who represent different walks of life, especially here in Davos. And so we all realize that indeed at the bottom of all of the problems that we are solving, all of the knowledge that we are discovering and unleashing, lie facts, as Mara was saying. So you who are not scientists can demand facts. You can demand them of scientists. You can demand them of science communicators. You can demand them of policymakers. who are going to impose policies on you. And then you can take this story and pick it up at any point. You can say policymakers should demand facts of scientists, and scientists should demand that all of you listen to them appropriately, and so on and so forth. So what I'm going to propose is that to support collaboration in science, we need a greater collaboration across the whole civil society.
Last word to you.
I think all of us who are somewhat involved in science, whether we're active scientists, whether we're in scientific institutions or in organizations that are close to science, we must make a conscious effort to get out of our bubbles and engage with society overall. I totally agree with you. I have a lot of data, research data, on this dichotomy in thinking. Quite a few people trust scientists very much because they think that they're objective and fact-oriented, they have no ulterior motives. And then there is this thinking, there's some cultural differences, but there's this thinking that this absolute desire is something, this absolute desire to know everything is diabolic, and it's the Dr. Faustus phenomenon, and I could pontificate on this for hours. So I think it's really important that we go out into society and we engage. I speak a lot more about science than I speak about financials, and I get a lot of pushback from quite a few people. I think the other important factor is to give scientists recognition and to provide fora beyond the inner circles of science in which scientists can become prominent. We try to do this in our company, and we're supporting quite a few such areas. And I've posted recently where I said, and it was interesting to see the results, where I said we need to celebrate scientists like rock stars. And plenty of applause for this. But quite a few scientists who said, no, we don't want to be rock stars. This is about drugs, sex, and rock and roll, and bad behavior, and so on. This is emotion. We are purely intellectual. I changed my posting now, and I say that we must celebrate scientists like stars. So that seems to be more easily palatable.
All right, well, we're out of time. Thank you all so much. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for taking part in the conversation.
Thank you.